First of all, thank you for the opportunity to present here today on behalf of the Atlantic Seabed Mapping International Working Group. We are a group of individuals, mostly in government bodies and state agencies involved in seabed mapping endeavours of various shapes and sizes. And we're effectively trying to line up the collective effort and infrastructure to map the Atlantic. So I have, let's say, three different hats on. I'm based in Ireland in the Marine Institute. I work on our national seabed mapping programme, INFOMAR, with our partners Geological Survey of Ireland, and it's funded by our Department of Communications, Climate Action and Environment. Secondly, I'm the Seabed Map and Work Package co-lead on a Horizon 2020 Mission Atlantic project. Kerry Howell, who's on this panel and will speak later a little bit, is very much involved in the benthic side of that, and I'll outline a little bit of what we're trying to do there in due course. And the third hat, if you want, is the EU co-chair of the Atlantic Seabed Mapping International Working Group. So just to kind of give you a potted history of why we're here today and where this sort of started, from my point of view, obviously in Ireland, we've been mapping our offshore since 1999. I've been involved since 2000. And we aim to finish our economic exclusive zone in 2026. And we have a fairly large footprint globally when you look at the map of the planet in terms of our marine EEZ. This is the signing of the Galway Statement, which took place in 2013, about 20 meters from where my office is based in Marine Institute in Galway. This followed shortly afterwards in December 2014. We had a workshop which we supported and helped coordinate for seabed mapping in Dublin Castle under the Atlantic Ocean Research Alliance, which followed, as Terry mentioned, the setup of this working group in Brussels in February 2015. And we shortly after, in July 2015, had a second meeting. I guess being a group that prefer to do things and talk, we actually got out there within 5 weeks. We were on a ship crossing the Atlantic, acquiring multi-beam data on an opportunistic transect. Our Celtic Explorer was heading to St. John's in Newfoundland for Memorial University, and we basically put representatives from each region on the ship and acquired a multi-beam transect. We did several more later with various vessels involved through the partnership, and we did a remote acquisition in 2017, which is the first one we had done in that way. Acquiring the data from shore. I was fortunate to be at an event in 2016 in June in Monaco, hosted by JEBCO, the Nippon Foundation, and the IHO and IOC, and I co-moderated a panel on the use of bathymetry in the context of the coastal perspective. Subsequently, that led in June 2017 to the publication of the Roadmap for Future Ocean Floor Mapping, and the setup of Seabed 2030 followed shortly afterwards. In the context of the benthic aspect of seabed mapping, we had a workshop under the AORA Coordinate and Support Action in IMR in Norway, and that was where my involvement in Mission Atlantic began as well. We published at the end of the Atlantic Ocean Research Alliance Coordinate and Support Action, which Marine Institute led, a subgroup of the working group, the mapping group, published a small roadmap document. And I'll just touch on that on the next slide to show you a couple of the highlights of the outputs from the various meetings we had, about 11 meetings between 2015 and 2020. The link to this will be embedded in the PowerPoint that will be available, and equally you can just Google Atlantic Roadmap AORA and you can pull down this little brochure. It has the details of who was involved, what organizations, individuals, etc., and what we were trying to do, and the context of the Atlantic mapping endeavor. We spent lots of time during these meetings discussing the why of seabed mapping and the value of it. We had various focus areas, leveraging existing knowledge, exploration, infrastructure, technology, and operational programs, trying to actively engage in mapping the Atlantic, taking advantage of vessels that would not otherwise have been undertaking seabed survey work, and promoting multidisciplinary survey. So we appreciate fully that this is not just hydrography, not just water depth. It's an ecosystem which is complex, and we need to engage with multidisciplinary scientists to map this and to tell the story, to communicate with people, which is part of what we're doing here today. We split the Atlantic up into 400 by 400 kilometer boxes, and the concept sort of originated from a discussion we had around how we approached the Irish mapping program, where we set up INFOMAR survey units. Each one was an estimated survey leg, or based on the duration of a vessel operational at sea. Thankfully, the Atlantic is deeper and you can cover a larger area in a period of time, so the boxes were bigger. But that sort of is a cartoon of the areas that are outside of the exclusive economic zones, in effectively the high seas. In terms of outcomes, we mapped at the last count last year over 1 million square kilometers of previously unmapped seabed territory. We had very, very strong industry engagement particularly from the midway through the sort of process from 2017, 2018 onwards. Fugro came on board very significantly and actively started to work with their clients to provide data into Seabed 2030 and into the Atlantic data centers. We had a lot of publications, and scientific literature has been generated on foot of the partnership and the research activity that the group were doing. Most recently, in the context of the Frontiers in Marine Science, Luis Somoza from Spain published on their survey in the mid-Atlantic. And there's been a very significant amount of capacity build in what we've been doing. We've endeavored to bring early career scientists on board the vessels, give people the opportunity to network and to build out on the partnerships that exist between the organizations involved. One of the key things, obviously, is that's come out of and the reason we pushed the brochure out was just to really put a call to action out, where we want people to, and we're asking people to resource and deploy existing infrastructure to map, to align priorities and standards and effort towards full coverage seabed mapping, and to strengthen capacity build and training opportunities, collaborate in research and dedicated mapping activities, and to share the data and the knowledge derived. There's very, very little point in doing this if we don't make it open access afterwards. And really, a lot of this will be facilitated through new innovation and technology use and deployment. So some of the key messages, just as a sort of a take home: the Atlantic seabed is not mapped. People think it is. The number is incrementing slowly, but we're about at 20% at this stage, indicatively. Atlantic seabed bathymetry and benthic mapping data are the scientific foundation for future ocean governance. And I say that in the context of, the seabed shape influences the actual dynamics of the oceans. And in the context of benthic habitat, it's impacted by environmental conditions, whether it's depth, pressure, ocean chemistry, currents, and the habitat will change and therefore is an indicator of change. So if we want to monitor over time the impact of climate change, we need to do more research in this space. The Atlantic mapping community is small, but it's effective, easily mobilized, very collaborative, and moving towards a shared vision. And that's been proven in the context of what we've achieved as a group without a real program or project or budget allocation. We're just leveraging activities in various projects and programs to get the work done and to try and develop a cohesive approach to this. We have a framework through the Mapping Working Group and the Aspire initiative, which you'll hear more about shortly, which we can adapt and we can extend this into the Southern Atlantic, and we can widen the scope as we go to try and bring in more broad-scale scientific interest and involvement. But both initiatives are based around the fundamentals of partnership, sharing knowledge and data, and engaging science, society, and policy. So it's not science for fun, it's science for betterment of society. Strategic guidance and planning, the approaches we've developed will help towards a strategic approach to operational deployment and leveraging assets and improving efficiency of what we do collectively, trying to get more out of the investment effectively. to support initiatives like Seabed 2030, which is seabed depth bathymetry focused. And we're looking at, I guess, trying to inspire the world to map its world's ocean by 2030. Vicky can touch to this again when she's leading the panel discussion. She's heavily involved in this initiative. And really this data will inform policy, promote sustainable use of our oceans and support scientific research. It's supported by the Nippon Foundation and JEBCO, underpinned by IHO and IOC. The Seabed 2030 global call to action is kind of based around 3 pillars, really. It is about acquiring new data and sharing data and developing the workflows and infrastructure. And Jennifer will touch on this a little bit later as well in the context of the Digital Bathymetric Data Center. Technology innovation, we have to be clever in how we deploy and develop technology to support this globally, but also in the Atlantic. And collaboratively, we need to do this together. It's too big a challenge to try and do this as a single entity organization or individual. So some of the $20 million questions that people might have who maybe aren't familiar with what we're doing. How much of this is going to, what do we mean, by seabed mapping in the first instance? And really we're looking at mapping in the context of a systematic approach, not piecemeal bits and pieces of data acquired by different equipment with different standards. We're trying to develop an approach to systematically map the bathymetry and benthic habitat of the Atlantic. Who needs it and why? We all do. It's fundamental science. If you do not have a map, you cannot make a plan and you cannot manage your marine resources. You wouldn't do it on land, so why should we do it in the sea? Who should do it and where should we start? Industry, government, academia, and society need to engage in this process. And we have started. As I mentioned already, we've mapped 1 million square kilometers of seabed that would not necessarily have happened had this process not begun. Why should I collaborate or share my data? As a scientist, you work hard to go out and gather your information, but it's little value in the lifespan it will take to better understand our oceans. A 3-year research project, if the data are not shared, will reside on a shelf somewhere of little value to anybody thereafter. So it's important that we all adopt an open and accessible data approach to this. And there is power in partnership. How much will it cost? Who pays and how? That's the big question, of course. And we are not at a point where we can answer that specifically yet. The benthic effort has not been defined. We've done a lot of work in trying to assess the level of work to map the bathymetry. How long will it take? Again, we've broken this down into effort days. This is just received last night from Andy Armstrong in NOAA and the Center for Coastal and Ocean Mapping in New Hampshire. And just that red box in the Southern Atlantic, this is an extension south of what I think Jennifer might show where we started this process in the Northern Atlantic later. But this is the southern extent, and just that one box, if you look at the effort in each little box therein, the 618 operational mapping days to acquire data in that area. So that's a significant amount of work. You can't obviously work all year round on one vessel, transits to and from shore, port calls, etc., and weather logistics will prevent you doing that. Just to move on in the context of Mission Atlantic, which I've directly been involved in, I co-lead Work Package 4 on benthic mapping, and our goal here is to generate new maps of seafloor characteristics and benthic communities and VMEs to support integrated ecosystem assessment in case study areas in the Atlantic and at an Atlantic basin scale. We want to develop a strategic mapping approach, which I'll talk a little bit in a minute about. We want to further characterize the seafloor and the benthic communities. We want to look at environmental drivers and pressures and their impact on spatial distribution of communities and VMEs, and model the spatial distribution based on future predicted climate change scenarios. So it's much wider than just the bathymetry, but the bathymetry is a foundation layer that we need to be able to do this modeling work. This is a little bit of a graphic, just sort of looking at what this framework might involve. We need to look at survey priorities, which areas are more important for what reason, how do we acquire this, what infrastructure can we use and deploy, how do we get access to it, how do we resource and fund the operational activities, how do we access the information. In terms of missions and initiatives, how do we link in this endeavor with the political activity and initiatives that are happening in the background? We're at the start of the UN Ocean Decade at the moment, and we are contributing data, significant data to that. In terms of socioeconomics, we really have to look at the cost, benefit, and the value of doing this work. We have to look at the societal impact and communicate this to people. Data have to be shared. The process of how you access it, is it controlled? Is it restricted? All has to be built into a framework on how we do this at a base and scale level. And how do we engage society in this and communicate the value and importance of doing it? What partnerships do we need to have in the room at the table to sign off on what would be an overarching framework? What is the capacity build required? How many people do we need? Do we need people ashore in remote stations driving autonomous vehicles? Where are the hydrographic and benthic graduates going to come from to support such a scale up of operational activity? The research and innovation process around this, how do you make the data accessible, streamline it, and speed up the access to it, and so forth. Connectivity is a key central issue, and that's what we're really kind of, the reason we're here today is to look at the joining up of programs, initiatives, organizations, and sharing of knowledge to make this happen. In terms of what's next, last slide, we are looking at obviously trying to build out this initiative, this mapping endeavor and the support for it into the Southern Atlantic across projects. Virla is here today from iAtlantic. I'm representing Mission Atlantic. Kerry's involved in that project, and One Ocean Hub and various other endeavors, which are multidisciplinary and involve lots of different aspects of marine science and exploration. Collate Atlantic mapping initiatives and activities and priorities. We really all need to know where each other are going, when, and what we plan to do there, so that we don't end up wasting effort or doubling up on mapping and wasting time, taxpayers' money, for want of a better phrase. Identify and expand Atlantic survey operational stakeholders and mapping. So we really have to make sure that we have all of the key people at the table in terms of developing this framework, so that there's an agreement on how data are acquired, where the priorities are, and how that data feeds in to support policy and management plans. We want to collate published guidelines and SOPs and take best practices that are already in place. There's no point in trying to rewrite the Bible on this. We have a lot of work done by different organizations, so we need to collate this, and there will be work needed to develop some of this and standardize approaches. We want to capture Atlantic mapping data flows and workflows, so that we can visualize where data goes, so that new players that come in and come on board this initiative have a very clear, concise idea on how they can contribute and where their information needs to go. We will look to assess the funding models and opportunities to drive the Atlantic mapping agenda. So it's a difficult challenge to map in areas that are not owned by your state, because the resourcing for that typically will go to mapping within an EEZ. So this is something we really have to delve into. And as a community, we really want to continue acknowledging the collective effort and ambition of the Atlantic mapping activists and supporters.